Welcome to the Bucky Brooks Show. I am Bucky Brooks, and today we're going to have a Jag-specific podcast talking about all the things that we've been hearing about coming out of OTAs. If you haven't heard, Jaguars started official organized team activities this week, so we got a chance to see the Jaguars on the grass, and there are a lot of interesting developments as it relates to this team, and I want to stick today to just the offense, because if we're going to be honest, as much as we love the defense and how well the defense played, the Jags, their fate, their plight will be really determined by how well this offense kind of pops in year two under Liam Coen. And I think it's really important for us to talk about the offense, because not only are we talking about like Liam Coen's baby, but when you look at the stars on this team, most of them are on offense. And I come from a place where we always would talk about 8 to 12 blue chip players are needed to compete at a championship level. That goes all the way back to my time working with the Carolina Panthers. It was an old philosophy that was passed down from Bill Polian and others. You got to have 8 to 12 blue chippers. And the most important blue chipper that you have to have is the quarterback. And so to me, the biggest development that we need to see and we need to monitor over the course of the summer is, can Trevor Lawrence go from good to great? The biggest jump that most players have in the system is from year one to year two. And given what we've seen from Trevor Lawrence, look, we're very optimistic that he not only will join the ranks of the top 10 at quarterback, but for the Jaguars to go where they want him to go, where they want to be, where they are a title contender, they need Trevor Lawrence to jump up into that top 5 category in terms of where he stacks amongst the quarterbacks in this league. When you look at his numbers from last year, he completed almost 61% of his passes. He had over 4,000 yards. He had 29 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Passer rating was at 91, and those numbers were solid. When you look at the way that he played the last 9 games of the season, it was very impressive to watch. You felt like the former number 1 overall pick was finally beginning to play like the reputation that preceded his arrival down in Duval. And when you think about what Liam Coen wanted him to do, he wanted to put a lot on him at the line of scrimmage. Remember early in the year, Trevor Lawrence didn't operate with a wristband. They were trying to challenge him to make sure that he fully understood all of the nuances of the play call, and he could kind of cite it from memory, very much like learning a foreign language. If you go over to Spain and you're speaking Spanish and you don't have Google Translator, you don't have these other things to help you, you have to kind of immerse yourself in the language to master it. And that's what Liam Coen was doing. But as they got into the year and as Trevor was getting comfortable and as they were trying to make him more comfortable, he did put the wristband back on. He did use those things on third down. He did show a greater command of having multiple calls at his disposal at the line of scrimmage. And we saw this offense really pop, particularly down the stretch. And so if we're looking at where Trevor Lawrence is and where he needs to go, there are 2 areas that we need to focus on. One, mastery and command of the offense, meaning he knows all of the ins and outs of the offense. The communication is great. He can see what the defense is doing. He has a ready-made counter to that by being able to change the play, make an audible, have adjustments that are available to him. He can spot it without having to be told, hey, when they come here, this is what we want. He knows it like the back of his hand, so he automatically gets the team into the right play. So we need to see growth in the command of the offense, the way he runs the offense, the way that he directs all of the pieces around him to make sure that everyone's on the same page, but more importantly, they're in the optimal play each and every down, because that's what the greats are able to do. They're able to beat you in the pre-snap phase of the game because they understand what this offense has. They understand what the objective of the offense in each play is, and they're able to counter the counter tactics that the defense presents. So then they can exploit the vulnerabilities of the defense. So we need to see that part from Trevor Lawrence in terms of the mastery and the command of the offense. The other part of it is the efficiency. We need to see those things go up. And so when I talked about a 60.9% completion rate and a 91.0 passer rating, those would be substandard by elite standards, meaning that we want to see him kind of push that number up in the completion percentage. I would say 65 to 67 is ideal. passer rating, it needs to be over 100. Like the top quarterbacks in this league have a passer rating over 100 because you're operating at an efficient level. You're not turning the ball over. You're producing enough big plays to satisfy what you need from this offense while still being able to drive the length of the field and get things done. I think it's interesting to compare Trevor Lawrence with Jared Goff, because if you think about what Sean McVay was able to do with Jared Goff, I think there's some similarities based on how both were perceived at the time that the new coach arrived and how they performed in that first year. And then I decided to look at the numbers for Jared Goff and see what improvements did he make in the second year in Sean McVay's system. And I noticed that his completion percentage went from 62 to 65 in year 2. His yards per attempt went from 8 to 8.4. So like a half a yard difference, which means more big plays. His pass yards per game went up from 253 per game to 293 per game. So we're talking about plus 40 yards per game difference. And the passer rating for both years for Jared Goff were well over 100, 101, 100, and 100, right at 100 respectively. So he already was operating at an efficient clip. So we see just by comparing those numbers, there's growth that can be had when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. And it's funny because it kind of coincides with the Rams becoming a team that became one of the top teams, a team that had the capability of being a Super Bowl team. And it was really tied directly to the performance of the quarterback. If you're the Jaguars and you're Liam Coen, you're saying, hey, I need to make sure that Trevor Lawrence is playing at an MVP level. Well, interestingly, FanDuel Sportsbook has Trevor's odds at plus 1,500 to win the MVP this season. Now, it may appear to be a long shot, but how many of us thought that Drake May would have a chance to be the runner-up for the MVP? Not many. And so when we talk about the play of the quarterback going up, naturally, he becomes a favorite and a legitimate candidate to be the MVP. And if Trevor Lawrence becomes an MVP candidate where he is in that conversation to be that, then the Jags are getting exactly what they want from their young quarterback in year 2 of the system under Liam Coen. So let's make sure as we're watching them and we're reading the things about OTAs and training camp, and even in the preseason, if they do elect to play him, let's make sure that he has a great command of the offense. He understands what he wants to do. We're seeing them get to the third and fourth option on plays, pass plays and progressions. We're seeing them getting to the right play, whether it's run pass check or pass run check, to take advantage of what the defense is doing. And then it's about continue to build upon what he showed the last half of the season. Can he stack good plays on top of one another? Can he avoid the negative plays, but find a way to create those big plays? If he does that with the efficiency and effectiveness that we talked about, the Jaguars are going to be sitting pretty. One of the areas that of the team that can help Trevor play at that MVP level is the wide receiver group. And I'm going to say I am curious to see if this wide receiver core can be a top 5 unit in the league. And I know it is odd to talk about this team in comparison to some of the other great wide receiver cores that we've seen around the league, where you talk about the Dallas Cowboys with George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb. You can talk about the Rams with Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in Cincinnati. There are a bunch of great groupings around the league. But if you're going to be a top quarterback and you're trying to surround them with the right pass catchers, well, you need that unit to operate at a high level so the quarterback can play and perform at a high level. And quietly, I think the Jaguars have the makings of a top 5 unit at wide receiver. Now, there'd be questions about is who's the number one, and do they have a legitimate number one that deserves to be ranked up there with the Justin Jeffersons, Jamar Chases, and Jackson Smith and Jigwas, and those top guys that we celebrate as being elite? I'll say this, and there's a lot of consternation about Brian Thomas Jr. and should they trade him? Should they keep him? Is he a number one? Where does he fall? They had to bring Jacoby Meyers over. Parker Washington continues to ascend. So do they really want him? What about Travis Hunter? Because, hey, he's going to be in and out the lineup. How does that impact Brian Thomas? I'll say this when I look at the group. This group, the pieces of the puzzle work really well together. And the reason why the puzzle pieces work well together is because they have complementary skills. When you look at the way that their games kind of complement one another, Brian Thomas Jr., I would say this, is the most talented pass catcher that the Jaguars have in the building. He's the most natural when it comes to being able to get open. He's the most natural when it comes to the big play potential and ability. He's a smooth route runner. He has all of those things. The drops last year overshadowed how well he can play on the perimeter, but I find it interesting that he averaged the same yards per catch that he did his rookie season, 14.7 yards per catch. The touchdowns were down, but in terms of the efficiency and the big plays that he delivered, those things still existed, even though we could say that he suffered from a bit of a sophomore slump, even though it did improve a little bit the last 6 games of the season when Liam Coen found a role that really fit his skill set, where he ran vertical and he ran out-breaking routes, and they found a way to take advantage of the free access that people would give them because they had to defend the other parts of the offense. So Brian Thomas Jr. being there, being available to be the big play threat, that is really important as we talk about building this unit out. Then it's Parker Washington Jr. One of the things that was a blessing in disguise when you had the injuries on the perimeter with Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter missing time, Parker Washington had an opportunity to get on the field and to make a ton of plays in the slot, on the outside, being a guy that can do the dirty work, a guy who is now more than what we thought he would be, which is a gadget guy, a guy who's a punt returner who on offense, maybe we can get him involved on screens and fly sweeps and option routes designed to allow him to take advantage of his superpowers, which is his ability to run after the catch. Well, after you've seen the way that he played, there has to be a bigger role for him, which is one of the reasons maybe why Travis Hunter is probably slated to play a little more defense, because they have more confidence in Parker Washington being able to do some of the things that he was able to do on offense. Interestingly, when you listen to the press conference after day 1 of OTAs, and Liam Coen talked about, hey, we need Parker to continue to expand upon what he did last season. So we want to make sure we get him the ball quickly in the screen game. We want to take advantage of his running skills with the fly sweeps and some of the trick plays, but we also want to make sure we move him around the formation to make sure that he is featured prominently in the passing game. When I hear that, what that means is Parker Washington is going to be a bit of a chess piece where he can play outside, he can play inside, whether it's Z or F, or even on the backside at X. He's going to have an opportunity to move around so they can take advantage of the things that he showed as, I would say, like a really dynamic weapon over the middle of the field. That is important because now when you look at this lineup, Brian Thomas Jr. is dynamic. He's electric. When he is on and locked in, you can't deny that, look, he's the same guy that his rookie season had 1,200 yards, and we were talking about him being the best receiver we've seen in Jacksonville since Jimmy Smith. Well, if he kind of reprises that role and regains some of that Pro Bowl caliber form, now with Parker Washington, you have 2 electric playmakers on the outside. That makes it very, very difficult for defense to determine how they're going to set the double coverage, the bracket coverage, the things to neutralize what we say are your most explosive playmakers. That allows Jacoby Meyers to kind of play the role that he always has played very successfully throughout his time in the league, and that is being the chain mover, meaning the third down option, the possession receiver, the guy that hooks up right at the sticks. You throw it to him, he catches it, he advances the chains, and it's another first down for the Jaguars. Well, if he is able to play that role as opposed to maybe an elevated role where we count on him to be the number 1 when he's really built to be more of a 2-3, it allows us to get back to a more balanced puzzle and a more balanced offense where guys are really doing things that work to their strengths. And it kind of reminds me going all the way back to when Doug Peterson was there, maybe his first year, when we saw the remarkable comeback in the postseason. Look, it was Marvin Jones, it was Zay Jones, it was Christian Kirk, and they were all interchangeable, and they found a way to just get the ball to the open man. They've kind of recreated that in a way around Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor should be able to benefit from Myers, Parker Washington, and Thomas playing in an interchangeable offense that allows them to play to the strengths of their game while also making the game very, very simple for the quarterback. The X factor when it comes to this wide receiver core to me is Brenton Strange. And Brenton Strange listed as a tight end, but when you look at him, really, he's a jumbo slot receiver. He's athletic. He's explosive. He's a seam runner that can run past linebackers. He's too big and physical for DBs. So he automatically creates mismatches on the perimeter that you want to exploit. We saw some of that begin to happen when he was available, and Liam found a way to just consistently feed him. Well, we'll see that continue to grow as he gets very, very comfortable. For all the people that were worried about the tight ends and why they're bringing so so many tight ends in the building to kind of catch this trend in this phase with 12 and 13 personnel, 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends on the field. Part of that is also designed to make sure that Brenton Strange is showcased in the passing game by putting the bigs on the field and allowing him to take advantage of the favorable one-on-one matchups against lumbering linebackers. Regardless, when you think of the Jags 11 personnel package, 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, when you have Strange, Meyers, Parker Washington, and Brian Thomas Jr., you feel great about that. And then I would say the XX factor would be Travis Hunter, because even though they talk about him taking a reduced role, it is interesting to hear that he is hovering around the offensive huddle. In mini camps, he's still there. He's on the walkie-talkie, so he's getting all the play calls and communication. So even though he may be sold as being the starting cornerback, please believe that he is going to have a big role and a significant role on offense. It may just be more as a package player as opposed to a full-time player, but it doesn't mean that he can't have the impact. And I talk about Brian Thomas Jr. being the most talented of them all. The best hands clearly go to Travis Hunter. That's why he has to be a big part of that. But as that unit goes and as they improve, it's only going to help the quarterback play at a high level. We talked about him playing like at an MVP level. If he plays at MVP level, it's because this wide receiver core has played like a top 5 unit in the league. And I would be excited to see that happen because it means they're going to score a lot of points and it's going to really set them up well to be able to go back to back in the division as the champs. Now, for all the positives that we have when it comes to the offense, I do have to point out the biggest question mark that we're looking at is the running back position. Travis Etienne, because he changed the pronunciation of his name. I used to call him Etienne. It's Etienne, now that he's back in New Orleans. Look, he's gone. And for all the things that Travis did, the thing that the Jags will miss is, I would say, his clutch ability. He performed really, really well when they needed it. Like whether it's catching the ball out the backfield or running inside or outside, he was very productive for the last 2 years, and particularly last year under Liam Coen. And remember, going into last year, there was a bit of a competition, or supposed to be a bit of a competition between him and Bejo Tootin to see who was going to be RB1. We saw that Travis not only won that competition, but he was a big part of the offense. When now you remove him from the situation and you don't draft a running back high, you bring in Chris Rodriguez from Washington. He's right now nursing an injury, so he's unavailable to hit the grass. But you don't know who is going to be RB1, RB2, RB3 behind Trevor Lawrence. And if you're doing it by committee, you wonder, hey, if I look at this group from a defensive standpoint, man, who's the guy that we're worried about? Do we need to drop another defender in the box, or are we going to play the Jaguars with 2 high shell coverage, play very, very soft, and dare them to nickel and dime it down the field and challenge Trevor Lawrence to play with the discipline and patience that you have to exhibit to defeat these umbrella coverages? The running game has to be a big part of it. So I know when we talk about the 2 tight ends coming over and being able to get big boy football, all that is great. And defense will match up when they see more bigs on the field. But if they are not threatened by the running game, it's all for naught. And so that's why the biggest storyline, or one of the biggest storylines, has to be which running back emerges. And not only individually can that running back be an RB1, but can this group collectively get it done as a committee? We've seen flashes from Bejo Tootin in terms of big playability. We saw LaQuinton Allen have a bit of a role, being a tough guy, designated tough guy. But collectively, can Allen, Tootin, and Rodriguez find a way to create some production that you can consistently rely on, and that is enough to force defenses to change the way that they change and face the Jaguars offense? It has to be that, because if they're not able to get some single high looks because you drop a defender in the box, it's going to be hard to deliver the big plays that we want to see in the passing game. That's why there's a lot of pressure on Rodriguez, Tootin, and Allen. And oh, by the way, Amir Abdullah coming over could be a bit of a sleeper pick as someone that is a pass-catching threat out of the backfield. We will see how many running backs the Jaguars keep, but you want to keep an eye on Abdullah because he's proven to be a very effective contributor when given a role as a pass-catching running back out of the backfield. Last thing I want to touch on, and it's probably the most important thing, because I've talked about all the skill positions, running back and the wide receiver core, the quarterback playing at MVP level, but the offensive line. How's the offensive line perform in year 2? There's a lot of positivity about the offensive line. That group comes back intact. Liam talked about the communication and the comprehension being better because everyone knows exactly what they're doing, having a full year under the system, because there hasn't been turnover at the line of scrimmage. That group comes back. And the one thing that we know about the offensive line, they're 5 individual people, but they all have to operate together. And so that chemistry and connectivity is everything. And when I look at this potential starting lineup with Cole Van Lannon, Ezra Cleveland, Robert Hainsey, Patrick McCurry, and Anton Harrison, look, they've logged a lot of snaps, and they've played together for a while. And even though Cole Van Lannon is now the left tackle after kind of bouncing around and playing right tackle and guard and being a utility player, they're solid up front. Now, they may not be the team that when you look at on paper, you talk about, hey, them being a top 5 offensive line, but collectively, when they're together, they perform really well. Got to get better in the short yardage situation so they can run the ball on 3rd and 4th and short and get those first downs. But collectively, the unit is solid. Now, the 2 players that we have to talk about right now, they're listed as backups, and one is Walker Little. He was the former starting left tackle. Cole Van Lannon supplanted him at that spot. So where does Walker Little fit in the lineup? Is he a swing tackle? Is he someone that can play the guard spot, the Patrick McCurry spot? Is he a trade chip or commodity? That's TBD. All of those things are TBD, particularly given his hefty salary. We got to figure out what is the future for Walker Little and how can he contribute to this group. Emmanuel Pregnon is a guy they took in the 3rd round. He is a nasty player at the point of attack in terms of his physicality, toughness, his ability and willingness to maul a brawl. They're going to create a role for him somewhere in that. Now, does he move out Patrick McCurry? Does he force Ezra Cleveland to go from left to right? Whatever that is. But right now, I see 7 guys that are capable of credible starters for 5 positions. That's a good thing, but the musical chairs that we have to watch in training camp, it's going to be interesting because how this plays out, given the injuries that we always see with the front line, it'll determine if Trevor is upright. And we talk about the number one job of the offensive line is to protect the king, to protect the quarterback. Let's see if this group can stay together and continue to build upon the positive steps that they made last season. And let's see if we can figure out who the best 5 are. Is McCurry included in that? Is this a lineup that, look, Ezra Cleveland continues to hold on to his spot? Not saying that it is a direct competition, but when you got 2 guys on the bench in Pregnon and Little who appear to be ready to play, you got to see if there can be some opportunities created in training camp to give them a chance to swipe those positions. So that are some quick observations on offense from the first week of OTAs. Next week, we will talk about it later. I'm going to make a trip to Duval on Wednesday, Thursday. I have some meetings. I get a chance to watch some OTA practices. So at the end of next week, we'll drop another pod that is Jag specific, because then I'll be able to put my eyes on the team and kind of continue to tell you how the team is progressing as they get ready for that final mandatory minicamp with all the veterans and the rookies and the young guys participating. But until next time, make sure you check out all the cool things that we're doing on Believe. Rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you tell a friend to tell a friend, and come back to the Bucky Brooks Show next week because we have more stuff to chat about on this pod. Until then.